I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and let me welcome you to this very special session in our Commander Series with General James F. Amos, the Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps. This has been one of our most popular speaker series, a chance to hear from the leaders of our military, and we want to thank Saab Americas for being our partner of this series now for 5-6 years running, so we really appreciate that. It's also a great honor always to have the chairman of the Brent Scowcroft Center for International Security here for the Atlantic Council, General Jim Jones, James L. Jones, former National Security Advisor to President Obama, former Supreme Allied Commander Europe, and Combatant Commander EUCOM, and the 32nd Commandant of the Marine Corps. Before I turn to General Jones to introduce this session, I also want to salute our Marine Corps fellow at the Atlantic Council, Colonel Mark Revore. It's because of General Jones that we now have a Marine Corps fellow at the Atlantic Council, and he does great work for us every day, though I think you would consider this not the heaviest assignment in his career. Thank you, General Jones.
Thank you, Fred. Well, I hate to start by correcting the president of the Atlantic Council. The reason we have a Marine Fellow at the Atlantic Council is because of that man, not because of this guy. So thank you, Jim. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really a great honor to be here today to perform a most pleasant function of introducing our 35th Commandant to you. At a time when the world is in flux in most parts of the world, at a time when predictability is not predictable, at a time when chaos seems to rule not only the waves but also the contours of the coastlines, it's important to have a military organization and capability that is flexible and that is adaptable and that can move quickly and do things that the nation wants or alliances want, as the case may be, and be effective in doing that. We are privileged to have today, as I said, the 35th Commandant of the Marine Corps, the first Marine aviator, naval aviator, who was selected for this position. And he also is probably the first of the current groups of service chiefs that have to do with doing more with less, budget-wise. I was thinking of how different that must be to be a service chief today, when for over a generation we've become accustomed to some form of supplemental. So if you didn't get it in your budget, don't worry about it. There'll be a nice supplemental coming at the end of the year. Transitioning from the horn of plenty to the horn of sequestration is not an easy task. And General Amos has been challenged in that regard and has acquitted himself magnificently. If you are to look at the end results of force structure and equipment readiness, General Amos, when he was a young general, was instrumental in bringing the V-22 Osprey aboard and staying with it. And the distinguished former chairman of the Armed Services Committee and I had many discussions during some difficult times for the program. And no one is more important in seeing and bringing the Osprey into reality than Senator John Warner. And we're honored to have you here today, Senator. And sitting next to you, former Congresswoman Tauscher, two great Americans. So in transitioning the force from a wartime footing to a different kind of wartime footing, because conflict surrounds us, but in the drawdown from Iraq and the drawdown from Afghanistan, General Amos has done a couple of things, difficult things simultaneously. Number one is to argue for the size of the Corps in response to what the nation needs. And the nation needs a force that can be adaptable, flexible, responsive, and able to do things quickly. And that predicate of speed and agility is something that he has never lost sight of. And as a result, although Marines are heavily positioned, oriented in Asia, which has been our history, you'll also find Marines in a special purpose air-ground task forces operating out of the Mediterranean bases, ready to support the commander of AFRICOM, ready to support the commander of EUCOM, and in different other areas in the world as well. And simultaneously within the Corps, he has preserved and, I would argue, significantly bolstered those things that are important to what it takes to be a Marine, our very ethos. He has championed accountability. He's championed equal opportunity. He's focused Marines on our heritage because this is a small, relatively small military organization that prides itself on its history, and above all else, does not want to disappoint those who came before us. And so the values, the integrity, the ethos, the discipline, and even the uniforms have a place in what we feel is important. And in all aspects of those categories, he has distinguished himself magnificently. So ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to introduce to you the 35th Commandant of the United States Marine Corps, General Jim Amos.
Thanks, sir. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm under a little bit of pressure here. Not only do I have my former Commandant here, but I've got Senator Warner and Congresswoman Tauscher here. So this is a great event, regardless of what anybody has to say here. But I am particularly excited about being here. I enjoy coming to the Atlantic Council. I feel honored to be here. Mr. Kemp, thank you very much. We just had a great lunch with a few folks. It's a very good, honest dialogue, which for me, it just is rich. So let me begin. I've got about 8 or 9 minutes worth of prepared comments. You may see some common threads. If you've sat at anything I've ever said publicly before, you may see some common threads that are worn through there. In fact, I would argue that you are. You'll recognize a phrase or two. And it's not because I don't have any original thought. It's because those phrases and those threads are probably today even more relevant and proven more true than perhaps when I said them the first time a year or two ago. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and again, General Jones, who's my mentor. You learn a lot, not only at the knee of a man like that while we were going through an awful lot together, but also in my capacity as the 35th Commandant. And Fred, thanks for inviting me here. I'll begin with a few thoughts as both a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and as a service chief, and I wear that Joint Chiefs of Staff hat first. That is my greatest responsibility. I'll never turn my back on my service, but my position in the defense of our nation is my first responsibility, and I take that as a predominant role. First, let me state up front that I believe our nation is at a strategic inflection point. I first heard that description used in 1995 by a former commandant. I didn't quite understand it at the time, and I've had plenty of opportunity to reflect on that since then. But I believe our nation, and really the world, is at a strategic inflection point. But for us as Americans, after 12 years of war, we're drawing down our forces in Afghanistan, resetting our military, and strategically repositioning and reposturing to the Pacific. We're doing this in a fiscal environment that is forcing us to sacrifice our long-term health our long-term health for near-term readiness, all being done in a world that, quite frankly, is not getting any nicer. Throughout the world, we see increased competition for scarce natural resources, increased prevalence and severity of natural disasters, more social unrest, cyber attacks, violent extremism, more regional conflicts, and the proliferation of military hardware and weapons of mass destruction. The falsely comforting state of what has become known as the new normal is beginning to emerge. Because of this, my sense is that there will be no peace dividend following the conclusion of combat operations in Afghanistan later this year. In fact, given our current fiscal realities, ladies and gentlemen, we will not do less with less, as some would believe. We will do the same with less, all done in a world that remains very dangerous. While our nation may be done with the thorny and nasty entanglements of this, quote, new normal, unquote, they are not likely done with us. There will be no shortage of work for America's United States Marines. Both here in the Beltway and across the nation, there is a dialogue beginning to emerge about what the American people want their military to do in the future. After 12 years of war, some believe that it's time, quite frankly, for America to furl the flag and to come home. I understand that sentiment and the fatigue that resides behind it. While wariness of foreign entanglements is a healthy American interest, almost a national pastime, we cannot afford to disengage globally around the world. In many critical areas, only the United States has the ability and the will to lead the world through some of its thorniest challenges. Given the fiscal realities of our budgetary challenges, the matter of priorities then takes center stage. Where do we engage? How much? And how much can we afford? I believe that the United States must retain a global presence that deters aggression, underwrites a stable global economy, and builds trust among our allies and our partners. Forward presence allows us to build strategic relationships that truly matter when the chips are down, when time is short, and when lives are on the line, just like we recently saw in late fall in the Philippines and over the Christmas holidays in South Sudan. The fact is, forward deployed naval forces are America's insurance policy. We are a hedge against uncertainty in an unpredictable world. The Navy Marine Corps team provides power projection from the sea, responding immediately to crisis, when success is measured in hours, not in days. From the super typhoon that struck the Philippines late last year to the rescue of American citizens in South Sudan over Christmas, the Navy Marine Corps team was there and carried the day for our nation. Now I'd like to switch gears and talk just briefly about Afghanistan. We Marines are coming out of Afghanistan about, as well as we can expect. As far as the mission goes, we exceeded all expectations. None of us know how the future will turn out. There are simply too many variables in that country. The entire world is watching to see how this week's presidential elections go. This is a moment of truth for the people of Afghanistan and for the region as a whole, as it is the potential to usher in the nation's first peaceful transfer of power. As for our continued military involvement, I believe that we need to be very circumspect and take a lesson from our experiences in Iraq. We spent our nation's blood and treasure there, and then we pulled out. It's yet to be seen how Iraq will turn out. We may be able to avoid the same uncertainty in Afghanistan as we move forward. In fact, I would argue that when viewing Afghanistan and Pakistan as a whole, we can't afford to simply pack up and go home. We must remember what brought us there in Afghanistan in 2001. We went there in Afghanistan to keep Afghanistan from becoming a safe haven for al-Qaeda and international terrorism. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past decade, our presence in Afghanistan and the extraordinary efforts of the coalition forces and the 50 nation partners has made a tremendous difference in the world. Regardless of the global landscape, it's the Marine Corps' mission to be ready and ever vigilant. After a decade at war in the most morally and bruising environment known to man, the arena of human combat, we are resetting the Marine Corps mentally, physically, and morally. As we prepare for future battles, your Marines are rededicating themselves to those attributes that have carried us to victory for the past 238 years. Those same attributes that carried Marines through the wheat fields and into the German machine guns at Belleau Wood in March of 1918 during World War I. Those same character traits that emboldened America's first offensive in the Pacific, the attack on Guadalcanal by the 1st Marine Division on August the 7th, 1942. That same sense of who we are and what we do and what we stand for our country was with America's Marines in Fallujah, in Iraq, and again in the Taliban strongholds of Marja and Sangin in Afghanistan. As an institution, we are rededicating ourselves to those timeless attributes of persistent discipline, faithful obedience to orders, strict adherence to standards, and concerned and engaged leadership 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. These values have defined our Corps for more than 2 centuries, and they will serve us well as we prepare for the missions to come in the next decade. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for indulging my opening remarks. And Fred, I believe we're ready for questions.
So General Amos, those were terrific opening remarks, and I want to thank General Jones also for his introductory remarks. It's a great pleasure to have you here, and thanks to you at the outset and the Marine Corps for your service through what has been a very long period of deployment. So let me get to that first, and I'll go to the audience as quickly as I can with questions. You talked about resetting the Marine Corps. You spoke of 238 years, persistent discipline, everything that the Marine Corps has stood for. Yet a few years back, one couldn't have imagined, 15 years back, the end of the Cold War, one couldn't have imagined a Fallujah deployment, an Afghanistan deployment. What do you think is the most likely contingency you now have to be planning for, and what sort of surprises? I know surprises by their nature are surprises, so you can't predict them, but clearly as you're looking forward, you have to plan for a different sort of world that you're looking at. What do you think it's going to demand of the Marine Corps?
First of all, I think as our nation, we need to always be prepared, and I think we are, and I think all the service chiefs would give a resounding yes to the fact that we need to be able to do some type of major operation around the world should that ever arise, and we are. We're prepared to do that. The servicers are well led. My fellow chiefs are I think the best I've ever heard about, known, been acquainted with. So we're ready to do that. I think the most likely though are these what I call, and for lack of a better way, is kind of the thorny, persistent, kind of nagging things that happen around the world. They're the reality of the decade and probably the next 2 decades that we live in. There are things that could be like South Sudan, where there's conflict and there's threats to American citizens and really the international community. So I think those are the kinds of things we'll be dealing with. I think there's a lot of engagement to be done around the world with our partner nations. We actually are, and to coin Admiral Greenert, the Chief of Naval Operations, I think we are a global force for good. I think that pretty much describes the United States of America and our responsibilities around the world. So I think these thorny, persistent things that will take 500 U.S. servicemen and women to operate here, 25 there, 15 there, I think that's what's probably going to consume us. And when you spread that out across the world, that's what we call the steady state requirements for the Department of Defense. And that's actually pretty high. It's higher than you think it is. The requirement to be able to do all those things, be forward presence, engage in the world, build partners, build trust. The last thing I'd say about that is you can't surge trust. When something bad is happening, for instance, in the Philippines, when that terrible 195-mile-an-hour typhoon came across, it was personal phone calls by Marine commanders talking to somebody on the other end of the phone who was a general in the Philippine Army, and they knew them by name. It wasn't a function of, well, I've got to work my way all the way through the State Department, and what are we going to do? And it was, how can I help you? I can be down there in the next 24 hours. And it's my name, it's relationships.
Thank you, General. Just some of the comments during your opening statement. We will do the same with less. We can't afford to disengage around the world. The importance of forward presence that you talked about as America's insurance policy, a hedge in an uncertain world, can't afford to pack up and go home from Afghanistan. And then this wonderful phrase you just used is you can't surge trust. Is it possible to do what you said, which is we will do the same with less? One already speaks of and sees signs of stress across American armed services, not just in the Marine Corps. Can one do the same with less? Is that possible? Or what does one give up with austerity? What are you worried about?
In my service, each service is just a little bit different as they've approached the Budget Control Act, sequestration, the reality of the kind of the fiscal environment we live in. So each service has a different set of circumstances and dynamics that they deal with. In the United States Marine Corps, the answer is yes, we can do the same with less. But there's a price to be paid for that. And doing the same with less in some areas requires money. So that means, and that equates to readiness. That equates to being able to trade something for a higher state of readiness or a persistently high state of readiness for the forces that are going to be deployed, the forces that are going to be engaging around the world, doing the nation's business. So for us, the answer is yes, but the price is readiness in these bases and stations. My home stations are programs that we have at the base. And by the way, our people live at the bases and stations. They live in the housing. They go to the programs that are there, the family programs. They use the training ranges that are there. Some of the equipment modernization and the resetting of the gear coming out of Afghanistan. We've had to reach into those accounts and harvest money out of those accounts and move that into paying for readiness, training, fuel, ammunition, personnel, schools, getting units deployed. So we can. The other thing I'll tell you is that because of the risk over there, I can't continue to do this for forever. There's risk in modernization. We've taken, each service has gone through and said, okay, I can afford this much modernization. I might really like to afford this much, but I can afford this much. And how long can you do that? And I would argue that in my service's case, the 36th Commandant will probably have to make some business decisions around 2017 to 2018 and make a determination. How much more can I take from over here to pay for readiness in here? And I think at that point, you're probably going to have to make a decision, he will, to say that I can't do it any longer. I'm going to have to dial the readiness down over here so that I can afford to pay for modernization, some slice of modernization, some slice of increased readiness over here. The last point I'd make on this thing for how long in our service, when we built the force, when the Budget Control Act was signed and sequestration was signed into law last March, I think it was the 2nd, we had already begun to settle into this sequester budget. I don't like it. I don't think it's good for our country, but it is what it is. It's law. So we decided we'd find out what size force could do the nation's bidding in the environment that we live in or going to likely live in. And that force at that point was 175,000 Marines, down from 202 to 175. That force was built on what we call a 1-to-2 dwell ratio. We have been on a 1-to-2 dwell ratio for deployment and back home for about the last probably 4 to 5 years. During the height of Iraq, when we were absolutely up to our necks in the battle in Iraq and partially engaged in Afghanistan, we were on a 1-to-1. In other words, you went for 7 months in Iraq and you came home, and you'd be lucky if you were home for 6 months before you retrained and reset, but you would then go. 1-to-2 means you're gone 7 months and you're home 14 months. We've been that way now for some time. This force, under full sequestration, will be a 1-to-2 dwell force. That's not optimum for a military to sustain itself. Our young Marines like the deployments. The career Marines, it's hard on families. So we need to get to a 1-to-3. I'm willing to build a Marine Corps for 1-to-2 if that's what the nation wants us to do, and it's all the money they can afford to give me. But that's how we're approaching this.
But in terms of the readiness, health, capabilities of force, 1-to-3 would be preferable.
Absolutely. In fact, that's the service target, 1 to 3.
You talked about this 175,000 Marine force as a moderate risk force built around 21 infantry battalions. What do you mean by moderate risk force, and are we in danger of having a moderate risk force going into a maximum risk world?
I think, in fact, that's a great question, because the matter of risk gets put out in the public. In fact, in testimony, we talk a lot about risk. I think it's important to define it. But I want to be clear about the 175K force. Under the President's budget that's on the Hill right now, what we call PB-15, that 175K force is what I call a moderate risk force, and I'll define that. If we go back to a fully sequestered force in 16 and beyond, in other words, everything, the law is fully enforced and we are back to full sequestration, that will be a high-risk force. Mm-hmm. And it's high risk, so let me talk about risk for a second. When I think of risk and define it, it's a function of readiness. In other words, how ready are your units to be able to go? It can be a ground unit, it can be a logistics unit, it can be an aviation unit. So at what stage of readiness are they in relationship to being able to deploy and do the bidding of the nation? So it's that. Risk also involves the ability to move that force forward in some period of time. So as we draw down strategic transportation, ships, airplanes, that pressurizes the ability to build up combat power. So it's not only how ready those units are, but how quickly you can get them forward, and on what transportation. The second or the third piece of this is how ready are the forces behind them? Are we going to go from boot camp to battlefield? Or are we going to go from boot camp to training at 29, organizing, and then training at 29 Palms, so we got a fully stood up unit that goes. So it's combat power buildup over time. And then it's the ability to sustain that force in combat over some given amount of time. If we go to a fully sequestered 175K force,
and we're now at about 196, or what
we're
is the
about
current size?
193.5 today, and we're on our way down from 202,000. But 175,000 Marines is when there's a major theater war somewhere, we're going to empty the bench in the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. In other words, we're all in.
Yep.
We're going to go, and we're going to come home when the war's over. So the only elasticity we will have people at bases and stations holding the fort down. But combat replacements, the ability to get a battalion to replace this battalion. There'll be no rotations. That won't happen. We'll all be in. The reserves will be activated, just about 40,000 reserves. That'll provide the elasticity and the kind of the shock absorber for that fight. And also perhaps give the National Command Authority the ability to be able to do something else, engage someplace else in the world. So when I say risk, it's readiness, it's combat power buildup, and the sustainment of those forces over time.
So let me ask one more question, and then I'll go to the audience and continue it back and forth. 1980, ratio to Army soldiers, Marines was about 4 to 1. 1990 ratio becomes 2.8 soldiers to 1 Marine. 2015, so going from 1980, 1990, 2015, assuming the high estimates for both the Army and Marines is laid out by the defense budget fiscal year 2015, ratio becomes 2.5 to 1. So, I mean, looking at that, one would interpret, or at least I would interpret, a preference of the Pentagon for expeditionary forces, small footprint approach. Is that the right thing to read into this? Isn't that where we're going?
I think it's a function of time. It's where we are in the world today. If you take a look, my personal opinion, you take a look at the world over the next decade or two, and I think it's going to be a world that will emphasize naval forces. And why is that? Because it's a low footprint. You step lightly on your friends and neighbors if you're on board a ship, and you're very flexible. You can basically go in international waters anywhere you want to go. And you send a formidable message. to somebody that might be threatening and somebody that you might want to threaten with naval forces off the coast. You put 3 ships out there with 2,500 Marines out there and all the combat power. That sends a pretty big signal of resolve to somebody that might have ill thoughts. So I think the world we live in will be, for the next decade or two, will be naval in character. I think, so for that reason, it would make sense that we would level off at some number that would provide that expeditionary capability. I don't get into how many more do I have versus how many more does another service have. I think it's recognition of the relevance based on the current security environment.
Thank you, General. Questions, please. And we have wonderful experts in the audience. You previously mentioned the legendary House Armed Services Chairman, Senator Warner. So, sorry? I meant to say Senate. And I inadvertently complimented the Congresswoman sitting next to you. But sorry, I knew exactly the position you were in. But Senator Warner, it's great to have you with us. So I see a question here, please.
Yes, I'm Randall Fort with Raytheon. General, the Marine Corps hymn famously talks about the Corps being the first to fight our country's battles on the air, sea, and land. There's a new domain in the 21st century, cyberspace. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see cyberspace, the challenges, the opportunities, the threats, and how you see the Corps responding in that new domain.
You know, people, thank you. I'm asked that question often. It's usually, sometimes it's asked in this venue, you know, what business do you have in cyberspace? You're such a small mom and pop organization. And, but the answer always evolves back to where we are in the world today. People actually still argue about, is cyberspace a domain? Is it, you know, what is it? Well, you know, we need to get past that. Cyber operations are real, both defense, offensive, just the way we even communicate, the way we share information between you and I, if we did email. That's the easy part. But imagine commanders on the ground in a thorny, confusing environment and having to share, which we do now. We share data, we share graphics all across the battlefield, unlike we ever did before. And really that's been the outcome of what we call distributed operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Forces spread out like peanut butter, everybody having a need for data, to include real-time data being pulled down from some type of system, manned or unmanned. So cyberspace is a critical part of where we are, not only globally as people, human beings on Earth, but for the military. It's the blood. It's the blood in the veins of how we communicate, how we pass data, trust. Imagine if we didn't have trust and confidence in the data that was coming into us, and you're a commander on the ground, and you have to make a difficult decision, and yet you weren't sure that the data you had was correct. You weren't sure that somebody wasn't into your system. So we have to pay a lot of attention to it. We're all in it together. All the services are contributors to this thing. It's the reality of the new generation. And I'll tell you, my sense is we are just on the cusp of this. This will evolve over the next 5 years exponentially. So we're all in it. And I think every service, to include the mom and pop Marine Corps, we absolutely got to be into it, and we are.
How well put. It's the blood in the veins. Please.
Thank you, General. My name is Cornelia Weiss. I'm a U.S. military officer, but I'm here in my private capacity here today. I'd like to address the infantry officer course. I understand, based on an article that recently came out, that men get a second chance and women don't. General Jones mentioned that you are a champion of equal opportunity, and I would appreciate you addressing this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, Second Lieutenant Sage Santangelo had come by my office. We've had, I think the number is 13 or 14 of our female lieutenants that have graduated from the basic school that have applied for our infantry officer course and have, and as you know, they've not made it yet. I bristle at the headlines, and I told Sage this because she and I exchanged emails prior to the publishing of the article. I bristle at the headlines they failed. Because imagine being a female second lieutenant and being in a predominantly male organization called the United States Marine Corps, and then being willing to step forward and to throw your hat in the ring, which is, for 238 and a half years, this arena has been dominated purely by men. And having the courage to come forward and throw your hat in that ring and say, like Franklin Roosevelt, it's the man in the arena. In this case, it's the woman in the arena. So I've got huge respect. I sat with each one of the lieutenants that have gone through, except for the first group. I got one of those, and everybody else since then. And Sage came by to see me, and she brought up the points about the ability to recycle. And so just in the last, since Sage had sent me this article, we went back in, I talked to my folks, and I said, we got to fix this. So we are. So the short answer is yes, we are. It wasn't fixed so they couldn't recycle as a penalty for them, but they were going to go on to another MOS. And we have a finite amount of time for observed fitness reports. For instance, Sage is going, she's in flight school. She's in Pensacola, Florida right now. That's going to consume the next year and a half in her life. So she's going to get academic fitness reports while she's in that. And then she's going to come out, and then she'll go to a training squadron, and then she'll join her first fleet squadron. Somewhere shortly after she joins her first fleet squadron, she's going to be up for what we call career designation. In other words, will you become a regular officer versus a reserve officer in the Marine Corps and be allowed to stay? So the original thought on okay, we're not going to allow them to recycle was based purely on their career path and the ability to get observed fitness reports and be competitive with their peers. I said yesterday, or day before yesterday, I said, stop. The numbers are so small, we can manage these careers. We'll get the fitness reports and we'll take care of them. And just so you know, I thought her article was superb. And I supported her through it. And I asked her last week, this is just an aside, I said, how much longer before flight school starts? So she's down there. And it's about, she said about August or September would be when the curriculum would begin. And she asked me what she thought she should do in the meantime. I gave her some schools. Then I asked her how she'd like to go to Afghanistan. So we're cutting orders for Afghanistan right now. I got an answer back in about 13 nanoseconds saying, throw me in. So Sage is going to go to Afghanistan to join the Marine Expeditionary Brigade Forward over there, and then she'll come back and pick up flight school in August. So I'm a big fan of our females. And I'll tell you what, my females mean as much to me as my males do. Okay? And again, I bristle pretty hard at anybody that says they failed, because I think it takes enormous courage to throw their hat in the ring on that.
General Amos, thank you for that answer. And for the uninitiated in the audience, MOS stands for?
I'm sorry, Military Occupational Specialty, what you do in the service. What's your job?
Yep. I've got so many questions. I think Senator Warner gets preference here. Could you hold on for just 1 minute for the...
General, going back in the foundation of the Marines was to work with the Navy and be an integral part of ship's company and to go ashore when needed. With the advancement of technology, our naval ships are, I think, superb today, but the space availability for the old Marine detachment has slowly disappeared. But talk a little bit about your number of Marines that are at sea today aboard vessels that could quickly respond to a call, direction, to go ashore. We used to have the old med fleets. You had a med deployment, and now we're shifting these strategies to Southeast Asia and so forth down in there. What do you plan to keep them afloat in that area of the world?
Senator Chairman, one of the things that we, as we built this 175K force, designed it over a year ago, was the realization that we absolutely have got to get back to sea. Now that would imply that we left. Actually, we haven't. But what we hadn't done is any large-scale amphibious operations or exercises. We did one a year ago called Bold Alligator off the East Coast of the United States. Actually started 2 years ago. The largest amphibious exercise that happened on the Atlantic to include all our partner nations, France, the UK, I can't remember how many partners, but a lot of them, came in, and it was about a week-long exercise. So the Navy came down with their amphibious ships out of Little Creek and out of Norfolk, and we had a full-blown, for the first time, major operation with thousands and thousands and thousands of Marine sailors and our coalition partners. We're doing exactly the same thing today. While we meet in here, there is that same type exercise going on off the coast of Korea, and it's called Songyeon 2. And we've got 2 Marine Expeditionary Units involved in this, so 6 U.S. Navy amphibious ships. The 13th Marine Expeditionary Unit out of Southern California, out of San Diego, and the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit out of Sasebo in Okinawa. So today we've got about 7,500 Marines on board naval vessels today, and we average that typically. Where we plus it up now for training are all the other kinds of things that we're going to do out of Camp Pendleton and Alpha Camp Lejeune. Sir, we're getting there. We're going back. Not only do we have the consistency of those 4 deployed forces, those Marine Expeditionary Units, but in addition to their time when they're on cruise, we're going back to training with the other amphibious ships that are left over. It's who we are. It's exactly what we need, and I tell you what, my partner, I'll throw a kudo out here for Admiral John Green, the Chief of Naval Operations. He is my best friend in the Chiefs. There's literally nothing I wouldn't do for Admiral Green. And the frightening thing is our staffs know that. So there's no more jockeying around between the Navy and the Marines at the staff level, because they know when it gets to Admiral Greenert and I, we're going to resolve it and we're going to take care of one another. So he is working very, very hard, along with our Secretary Mavis, to try to figure out how we can get more naval ships. And I'll just put a plug in here. Since that's a part of the budget that I don't own, I just get to inherit it and ride on them. Quite honestly, Navy ships, capital ships, and you know this, sir, from your secretary days, they're expensive. It's not like buying a vehicle or a tank or a howitzer. They're very, very expensive. And so I put a plug in. I think our United States Navy needs more money for ships.
It's wonderful to hear a Marine General make that argument. So
I can say that, and I'm almost harmless at this point.
if I'm not mistaken, the former Minister of Defense of Georgia.
Thank you very much, Batu Kutelia, McCain Institute. I am from Georgia. First of all, let me thank you for the job Marines are doing in Afghanistan, and I think you are doing a fine job there and very sophisticated job. My question is, having in mind the current affairs and state of affairs with Russian Federation, how it will affect the troop withdrawal process and the equipment withdrawal process from Afghanistan?
Yeah,
Good question.
that is a good question. I don't have a definitive answer. My sense is I don't think it's going to change that. I think they're related, but they're not related. I think the greater question is with regards to troop withdrawal in Afghanistan and equipment withdrawal in Afghanistan will be what happens as a result of the elections that take place in Afghanistan the end of this week. I mean, that's a significant event. I talked just briefly about it in my opening comments. It's important for the global community, for the 50 nations that have been part of the coalition in Afghanistan. Our partners, Georgia's just been a phenomenal partner through all this. So we have to wait and see how this turns out. The candidates have all indicated that they will sign a bilateral security agreement. So we'll have an election at the end of this week, and we'll see, is there a president that comes out of this, or is there a requirement for a runoff election, in which case things get delayed a little bit farther. But the key will be what happens when the president is elected and put in office. Will a bilateral security, that will dictate the slope of the curve of the troop withdrawal and the equipment withdrawal. In my service, we have 79% of the equipment. If 100% of the equipment we had at the max we ever had on the ground there, we've got 79% of it out already. And we're down to just a little bit under 5,000 Marines. Now, we've got a lot of coalition partners in there, Georgia, the Jordanians, the UK are, a principal partner on the ground there. So we've got lots of friends in where we are. But we're prepared to go to zero by the end of the year if the bilateral security agreement. But I don't think it's, from my perspective, they're not related, but they're not. I mean, they're related only because they're global events, but they're not related as far as I'm concerned with the force withdrawal and equipment.
Thank you, please. Let's go here, and I'm just trying to catch people as I see them, so I apologize if I've got you a little bit out of order. So please. And microphone, thank you.
Thank you, General. My name is Jeannie Nguyen with Voice of Vietnamese Americans. I thank you for your service, and I'd like to take this time to also thank General Jones for your service and all the men and women in uniform, especially in the Marine Corps, for all the service that you have provided, especially in the war in Vietnam. We respect the Marine Corps of the U.S. at the time very much for all your contributions then and now. So my question to you is, I admire your statement that you would keep the force readiness and functioning the same level for less. My question is, what if the contingencies require more for less? Are we able? And then another point that you put out is the priorities. You said when, you said where and how much. My question is when. Are you able to join in to make the decision as of when the force will should and should not enter into the pictures together with the commander-in-chief? Because when can be very important, as you have said, that we have sent out the signal of resolute, and that makes significant result in the cost and the outcome and the how long we have to sustain the presence there. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, just last point. Right now, I think our defense secretary is convening with other defense secretary of other nations in Asia Pacific. And I'd like to ask if there are plans for the Marine Corps to collaborate with other Marine Corps of other nations in Asia, especially in Southeast Asia. Yeah. And are they able to support you, to help you in case of, especially Vietnam? Thank you.
Well, the last question is probably the one I enjoy answering the most, and General Jones, when he was the commandant, worked very faithfully with all the other commandants, what we call the worldwide commandants. They've grown since then. There have been countries that have built Marine Corps as a result of just relationships and desire to have a force that's focused in the maritime arena. So we meet. I haven't had a worldwide conference yet. I've had one down in South America where I brought all the South American and Caribbean commandants together. But we do talk. We talk fairly often. So there's a collaboration between us. I think the goodness that's come out of 12, 13 years of combat have refined a lot of our skills. And it's been that way for all the services. Each service has gotten better over the last 12 to 13 years, more focused. So our fellow commandants around the world, those support sources, and sometimes they're not called a commandant, they're called the maritime admiral, but he owns the maritime ground forces. They understand that we have honed those skills, and so there's an affinity right there, and they want to collaborate with us. So we train with them whenever we can. This exercise off of Korea right now, we're training not only with the Republic of Korean Army, but predominantly with those Marines, the ROC Marine Corps. And they're making the amphibious assault side by side with us. The first part of the question, I want to make sure Pardon? Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, I do think it goes back to the matter of risk. There is a risk, and it goes to what we talked about earlier. Part of the risk, and you have to evaluate. And by the way, risk is not, my personal opinion, risk is not a point on the continuum where you dial risk down and you dial it up. Risk is some marginal position on a continuum where the commander, and it could be the commander-in-chief, our president. It could be Congress. It could be a service chief. It could be the Secretary of Defense looks at that and goes, that's moderate risk. When we go commit ourselves to a major conflict and the Marine Corps is all in, there is risk to someplace else in the world. But the thing I'd try to remind everybody, we're part of the joint force. Maybe in the old days, the Marine Corps never worried about that. I don't think so. I think we've actually always been probably joint and probably the harbinger of the joint force. But we are part of a greater joint force, and there is capacity to be able to do some other things. It depends on what those other things are. But your question is very important, because just because we're tied up in here doesn't necessarily mean that bad things or thorny things aren't going to happen someplace else in the world. And the joint force needs to be prepared to be able to kind of do it all, if that makes sense.
Someone in the back's been quite patient, so let me take a question that right all the way in the back. Thank you.
My name is Svein Helgason from George Mason University. How would you assess the effects that allowing gays to serve openly in the military has had on unit cohesion and readiness and morale since the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's simple. I don't think it's had any effect at all. And I'm very proud of the way all the services have, and I'm very proud of the way our services reached out. Unless I'm missing something, and I don't think I have, there's been zero perturbations whatsoever. I think the cohesion, the units, the morale is just fine.
Thank you. Please, here and then right here in the front row, right here, second row. We've got it. Thank you. Please.
Thank you. Sydney Freeberg, BreakingDefense.com. Hello, General. Good to see you again. I wanted to push on the intersection of strategy and sequestration, two things that are not particularly compatible. You know, if you have a world in which most of the things are going to be the sort of Sudan V-22 to Sudan model, and yet you still have to sort of worry about that major contingency operation, or perhaps something that's so high intensity, it's all missiles flying through the air, and maybe there's no role for ground forces. Some would say. What investments apply across that whole spectrum that you can get multiple use out of, no matter where you are, from the low consequence, high probability to the high consequence, low probability, and what are things, F-35B, for example, that are more narrowly applicable? It seems like manpower is a constraint across the spectrum, for example. So that may be an investment that has wider applicability than some of the high-tech platforms, like ACV, for example, which is sort of on hold.
Yeah, it's not on hold, Sydney, so don't go typing that on your computer back there.
I typed that, it's not on hold.
Yeah, but I think if you just, I think to answer your question, kind of those general capabilities that would fit all across the range of military operations, everything from humanitarian assistance, handing out water, rescuing people in a terrible crisis such as the Philippine typhoon, to some type of full-scale major theater war someplace in the world. I think there's a slice of, and I think, by the way, I think that slice is pretty good, pretty hefty, of forces that will accommodate all the way to the left and right of that range of military. I'll give you an example. I think amphibious ships. I use the analogy as the Swiss Army knife of the Department of Defense's arsenal. I mean, if you want a pair of scissors, you break it out. If you want a knife blade, you break it. If you want a can opener, you break it out. If you want something that will saw a twig, you break out that part of the Swiss Army knife. If you want to hand out humanitarian supplies or food or rescue people, you bring in an amphibious ship full of Marines and sailors. If you want to rescue people that are injured, you'd fly them out to the USS Kearsarge or the Baton or the Iwo Jima or the Boxer, and you put them in your hospital in the ship. You want to do engineering work, you bring the Seabees on board, because we've got maritime afloat preposition stuff, and that will work with Seabee operations. You'll do port opening with those operations, a major theater war. So those forces, and then don't forget the standard issue United States Marine. That United States Marine, he or her, is trained as a rifleman first and can hand out water, can hand out diapers in Tomodachi, can hand out fuel to fix heaters in Tomodachi when it's the middle of winter in Japan. They can also make a forcible entry landing someplace, the exact same force. So I think the bulk of those forces in my service are what we would call general purpose, applicable across a range of military operations. Some become a little bit more, and by the way, it's that way with our vehicles, and it's that way with our amphibious combat vehicle. Most people don't realize that when Haiti went down, there were 7 amphibious ships that pulled into off the port in Haiti. They weren't pulled pierside because you couldn't get pierside, but 7 amphibious ships with over just about 6,000 Marines and all those amphibious tractors that swam ashore and swam back every day, carried fuel, water, medical supplies, people back out to the ships. Yet that's a combat vehicle. And there wasn't 1 ounce of combat involved in Haiti at that point. It was humanitarian. So I think even vehicles fit that. F-35, when you think about what the capabilities of the F-35B are going to be, it's more than precision targeting, which it will more than be willing to and capable of doing. It's more than stealth to get in on the first day of the fight, which is exactly what it can do. It's information sharing. It's sharing information across a broad battlefield. It can be a battlefield of ships that have not gone ashore yet. It can be a battlefield of people that are on the ground and F-35 are passing information back and forth. It's electronic warfare. And the last thing I'll say is that imagine 2017, when the first United States, actually the world's first 5th generation airplane deploys to the Pacific. It'll be United States Marines. It'll be VMFA 121 out of Yuma, Arizona, which has got 16 airplanes today and it's fully stood up. So when that thing goes to the Pacific in 2017 and flies aboard the USS Wasp and something happens around the world and you want to shape thought of somebody that might do ill, nothing's happened yet. We haven't gone ashore. This is not major combat operations, but you want to shape the thought of a nation that perhaps has untoward intentions. You pull a 5th generation, you pull a marine amphibious, a naval amphibious ship up full of 5th generation airplanes, plus all the other part of the kit that will be there. And I would say that has an applicability across a range of military operations much greater than just strike and major theater war.
Tell it.
Am I wrong about ACV, sir? Before I let that, let's not let that error stand if I've made one.
No, it's not. We are doing well with the ACV. We're about to go public with with the way forward on it. It's affordable, ladies and gentlemen. It's doable, and we can have our cake and eat it too here. So we're pretty excited about it.
And for the uninitiated, again, ACV
The
is
amphibious combat vehicle, it's a replacement for 40-plus-year-old amphibious tractors that, quite honestly, you probably saw on NBC News last night as they were swimming ashore, coming out of the Boxer and the Essex off the coast of Korea.
Thank you. So here and there, please, up here and then after that. Thank you.
Hugh Grindstaff, you've moved you're moving 2,500 Marines to Australia, but I served 7 years on Okinawa in the Army and Fukushima. How about the Fukushima relocation? How is that going?
I think it's everything is on track. In fact, I'm more optimistic today than I have been in a long time, and I've been actually, from my days as assistant commandant in the last 3+ years as the commandant, I've been tracking that very, very carefully. As you know, Prime Minister Abe is a big proponent of the Pacific realignment writ large. You know, the governor last year signed the landfill agreement on Okinawa. So that paves the way now for a lot of things to happen. They're in the process of happening right now. Fukushima will close when the new airfield is complete and built and certified up on the northeast corner, northeast coast of Okinawa at Camp Schwab. So one begets the other. We're good stewards of the land right now. We're already on track. In fact, I would argue that we're ahead of schedule on what we call land returns. A lot of the land down in the southern part, down in Naha, the port at Naha, the storage facilities we have down there in the way of warehouses and whatever. The Japanese government has been very faithful to build new facilities farther north. We're prepared to give that land back, and there's a schedule to do that. I feel pretty good about it. I think we're headed in the right direction. I'm very optimistic about the Japanese government. I'm very respectful of Prime Minister Abe's position. He's done quite a bit to resolve this along with our government. I think we got the right solution at hand. I think we're very close.
Thank you very much. We're down to the last 7 or 8 minutes. Please, a question here.
Shin Shoji from NHK. So regarding the realignment, Congress required a master plan by the Marine Corps and OSD in order to unfreeze the money. And I think it's been a couple of years now, but how imminent is the master plan being submitted to Capitol Hill?
Yeah, they have. The National Defense Authorization Act was very clear last year, and Congress has said that we need to come forward with a master plan for the entire Pacific realignment, which includes Hawaii. Because at the end of this, on the backside of all the realignment, the Okinawa moves up to Camp Schwab, and the land movement, and then going to Guam, and the build out of Guam, and finishing the build out in Iwakuni, then down in Australia. The last part of that is Hawaii, to put 2,700 more Marines in Hawaii. And so Congress has, I think, rightfully said, hey, wait a minute. Give us the entire plan, and we're working on that right now. It's probably going to be a little bit segmented. For instance, the supplemental environmental impact statement for Guam will be completed by December of this year. The record of decision will become public the early part of 2015, and that's for the building of the cantonment area and that type of thing on Guam. The training ranges on Guam and over on Tinian is another supplemental environmental impact, and that won't be complete for another year, 2016. And so when that is published and the record of decision is published, then that will inform us how many ranges, how big, and what are the range restrictions for training on Tinian. So we've got to conclude a couple of these environmental impact requirements, and rightfully so, before we can develop the entire big picture. And then we've got to do exactly the same thing for Hawaii. So we're a ways away from being able to physically be able to complete the entire package. But yet in the meantime, the Japanese government has been very faithful to give money. We've gone to Congress on issues kind of one at a time. They've freed up some money for last year and this year so that we can do some ramp building and utilities repair and a hangar built on Guam. So our intention is to meet Congress's letter of the law as best we can, and then where we have requirements to go back to Congress one at a time and present this to Congress and say, here's where we are. Are you willing to support this? And if that's the case, then you can free up that money, and we can do this thing iteratively. But our intent is to meet Congress's will, which is the whole thing. It's just going to be a while.
General Amos, going a little bit from micro to macro, at the House Appropriations Committee, Defense Subcommittee last week, you said our nation is now at a strategic inflection point. We've been arguing that at the Atlantic Council for some time. We compare it sometimes to 1919, 1945, 1989. Is that what you're talking about? Can you flesh that out? And if you're at this kind of inflection point, I'm just wondering, as you're sitting down, and these are fantastic answers about where we're going, what we need, how it works, but how hard is it to sit in a room and actually predict what's coming at us?
Well, you can't. And what you have to do is, you sit around what we call the tank. And for those of you, that's the main, it's down on the second deck of the Pentagon, and it's a euphemism for what used to be there during World War II. It's not actually a tank, but it's a room, a conference room, and that's where the chiefs get together with the chairman and the vice chairman, and that's where the Joint Chiefs sit down and talk about it. You take a look around that table, all of us, and there's probably close to 300 years of experience. So a lot of it becomes experience, intuition, instincts, and because you can't predict this. None of us are clairvoyant, but what we hope to be is informed. And each one of us have a sense for what the threat is. Each one of us have a sense for what the global economy is going to look like, the importance of the global economy, and therefore freedom of navigation and global commons and all the stuff that kind of flows out of that. And we have a sense for what the threats are. I mean, we get briefed on these routinely, and of course, as things pop up, like a Mali in Africa, everybody focuses on that. A Syria, a South Sudan. So over time, you get a sense for what's happening around the world. And so our instincts and our experience are what plays in here as we make recommendations, giving our best military advice to the Secretary of the Navy, the Secretary of Defense, the President. And that's really where we come in. It's the best military advice based on our experience and what we know and what we believe to be facts and what we believe to be suppositions. So it's a blend of all that as we move forward. I don't know whether that...
And what is, and so to the strategic inflection point, and this age-old question, what keeps you awake at night, but maybe deal with both of those. What do you mean by strategic inflection point, and what concerns you the most?
By making that comment, I was referring to what I consider to be the future security environment. This environment of, to your earlier question, the thorny, nasty, dirty, heavy lifting of the things that happen around the world for a variety of reasons, whether it be regional conflict or whether it be extremism or whether it be drought or natural disasters or whatever. All those things are still going to be there. They're not going away. The natural disasters in the Asia-Pacific area claim 70,000 lives every year. Not maybe. Every year, 70,000 people lose their lives to natural disasters in Asia Pacific. That's $35 billion worth of money, worth of stuff. So these things are there. So that's the stuff that we're going to continue to. I don't see us backing off on it. I think the world, the population, I think the youth bulge in Africa and certain parts of Southern Europe, not Central Europe, but Southern Europe, are going to pressurize the economies in areas where they don't have much of an economy. So I look at all of that, and I make a statement that I think the world is going to be a very dangerous place. I don't see it slacking. I think what happened in Ukraine is kind of a wake-up call for everybody, an area that we kind of went, okay, this is all just going to be fine. I think it's a wake-up call. I think we need to pay very close attention. We can't turn our back on Europe. We can't turn our back on Africa. So we're doing all of that. And what makes it a strategic inflection point? Because we're drawing down the forces. We're resetting coming out of Afghanistan. I'm trying to get my equipment through the depots so that I can get it back out to the fleet. We're rebalancing forces to the Pacific. We're reacting to other things and other crises around the world. And we're doing that in a budget that is putting more pressure on the Department of Defense and causing us to make decisions like, I'll build a 1 to 2 dwell force, because that's what America needs. America doesn't want a 1 to 2 dwell force, but America is telling me that's all they can afford. And I've said all along, at the end of this, when we go all the way through it, the Marine Corps will build the most capable and ready Marine Corps that America is willing to pay for. So that makes it a strategic inflection point. It's all happening at the same time.
So, and to close then, that's what keeps you up at night. I'm not saying literally keeps you up late at night, because clearly if something's keeping you up late at night, it should be keeping all of us up late at night as well. Is it that perfect storm of things coming together where we're unprepared, or is it more specific than that?
I think that's been the persistent kind of landscape or universe that all the chiefs have been operating in for the last year. Do I lay awake at night? No, I don't. Unless it's because I'm old, and it's inadvertent. But no, I tell you, the only thing that worried me a year and a half ago was and I'm really serious about this, was to be able to shepherd the Marine Corps through this period of austerity. You know, when you're the service chief, whether it be, Commandant Jones or me, or whether it be Ray Odiern or whatever, we're responsible not only to the nation, but to now our service to shepherd these forces through this period of austerity. I think we've come out the other end of this thing about as good as we can get for the time being. So I don't lay awake at night. What you've described is the persistent environment in which I spend a lot of time thinking about during the day. I make decisions based on that. But the truth of the matter today is not much keeps me awake at night. And I tell you that because the young men and women that wear the Marine Corps uniform, wear my cloth, they are, I've heard people go, "Oh, sir, I mean, it's been hard. They're tired. They're worn out." That's not the case in my service. They're happy. Quite honestly, the youngsters, which is about 65%, 62% of the Marine Corps is on their first enlistment. The average age of the United States Marine Corps is about 24 years old, period. 62% are on their first enlistment. We are a very, very young force. Those young men and women signed up to deploy. So I don't get any of this, "Hey, sir." In fact, here's how I get it. I go see them aboard ships, go see them in Afghanistan. And so I'm talking to a bunch of young Marines that haven't had a bath or a shower in probably 35, 40 days, or eaten MREs or tray rats if they're fortunate, and are sleeping on the ground. And cold at night, sweating during the day. And so, "Okay, Marines, give me your questions." And the first question is from some youngster in the back. "Hey, sir, when am I going to get to deploy again when I come back? Is this battalion going to be able to deploy again? Am I going to get to go to war again?" So the youngsters want to deploy. So we are a happy lot. We're just working our way through what all this means with regards to steady state after we come out of Afghanistan. But that part I feel pretty good about. And I was just down at Camp Lejeune all day last Friday. And I can't tell you what it means to wade into thousands of Marines and have the smiles on their faces. So there's not a lot that keeps me awake at night.
Well, that's a good place to end this conversation. General Amos, I think all of us listening here and online, on television, et cetera, will probably sleep a little bit better tonight as well. Having listened to you, I can't imagine a better shepherd for this period of time, more qualified to get us through this. And so let me, on behalf of the audience, not only thank you for your service and your leadership, but also the women and the men of the Marine Corps. Thank you very much.
Thank you.